Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from the 1st of April 1901, and this article is entitled Lives of Our Leaders, Presiding Patriarch, John Smith. So we are continuing our Lives of Our Leaders series. However, we are moving past the apostles. Now the reason being is that they've covered them all. So they covered all of the ones that had recently been called, all the ones that were active at the time of 1900, and even ones who had been recently deceased. Yeah. So like in the past year or two. So I think that, that's kind of really thorough, they did a really thorough, quite, complete job. So I'm really quite impressed. I am excited to go on to the Presiding Patriarch. Presiding Patriarch is a calling that no longer exists today. The last one was, I believe, Eldridge Smith, yeah? And the reason being is that they tried to always get a member of the greater Smith family, I would say. So like Joseph Smith, either his uncle was also one of them. So it didn't have to be like his descendants, of course, thank goodness, because that isn't going to work anyway. But his brother Hyrum was also patriarch for a while. And so it's been like tradition since then to have it be one of Hyrum's descendants. But it hasn't always been. Of course, I just said his uncle was as well as his father. Yeah. So here's the, I guess I want to say the succession. And the reason I want to mention this is because it is really easy to get this mixed up. And I don't want anybody to be like, I really don't get this at all. So the first presiding patriarch was Joseph Smith Sr., and he was patriarch from 1833 to 1840. Okay? And then he passed away. In 1840, Hyrum Smith was called, and he was from 1840 to 1844. And then, of course, he was martyred along with his brother in 1844. And then they called William Smith as being one of the greater Smith clan, and he was only there during 1845, and then he completely rebelled against the church. He thought that it meant that he would be president of the church, I guess. And he's like, oh, see, I'm important, It's like, no, dude, calm down. So he was actually, I believe, one of the only major Smith clan who was excommunicated. Yeah. And then John Smith, who was the brother of Joseph Smith Sr., which was the uncle of Joseph Smith Jr. He became patriarch in 1849, so they had a few years without one. And he was there until 1854 at the time of his death. Now, this is where it gets confusing, okay? Because I just said we're talking about John Smith. It's not that John Smith, okay? John Smith was then called to succeed John Smith. And the problem with that is it wasn't a junior. It wasn't John Smith's son. It was Hyrum Smith's son, John. And he doesn't have a middle name, neither of them did. So it's really difficult to distinguish them. And since he's not a junior, it's one of those things where we had Joseph F. Smith as president of the church, and then Joseph Fielding Smith as president of the church. And technically, Joseph Fielding Smith was Joseph F. Smith Jr. They could have just called him Junior, but they didn't. They never did. They chose to use his middle name. But the problem here is we don't have middle names. And for a while, I'm going to be honest, I found this very confusing because they didn't even make a big deal out of it during conference. And I had read those conference sustainings at the time, and it is not clear. And you have to really dig into it. If you finally dig into one of the talks, they mention it. I know that, somebody testified, I know that John Smith, who was quite the younger one, the son of Hyrum, would do a good job succeeding his uncle, his great uncle, John Smith, who he was named after, I guess. I don't know if he was named after him, but it was just like, if I hadn't read that talk where they had mentioned it, I would have not known that it was a different person. In fact, at one point I looked at the timeline and I'm like, geez, he served a long time. And he really did. So, son of Hyrum Smith, John Smith, was called in 1855. And he was presiding patriarch until 1911. That's a long time. He was born in 1832, so he became presiding patriarch at the age of 22, the ripe old age. So this is the brother of Joseph F. Smith. Yeah? So I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. I believe Joseph F. Smith, Hyrum Smith didn't have that many sons. I think he had 2 or maybe 3. So these might be the only 2, John Smith and Joseph F. Yeah? So I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know he didn't have that many children. So, I mean, he died too young to have too many children. But, so then, just the timeline, continuing the timeline of the presiding patriarch, then they called Hyrum G. Smith, and then Nicholas G. Smith, and then they kind of ran out of people, and so they started calling other people, Frank B. Woodbury, George F. Richards, like they weren't even related to Hyrum Smith. And then they called Joseph Fielding Smith, he was the great-grandson, who is not the same as the Joseph Fielding Smith who was president of the church. So this is the son of Hyrum M. Smith. And anyway, like we could go into him another time, but yeah, that's why it's so confusing. Then the last one was Eldred G. Smith, who served from 1947 until 1979, which was a very long run, after which they chose, as a church, to discontinue the calling of presiding patriarch, as I feel like it wasn't really necessary anymore, and they just also completely ran out of descendants of Hyrum Smith. Oh, it's so hard. Yeah, anyways, like, it's hard for me to specify because the names are so similar. You know, there's so many Smiths. And once again, we have 2 John Smiths. We have 2 Joseph Fieldings, I just mentioned. And, like, we have 3 total if you count Joseph F., because his middle name is also Fielding. And, you know, it's just one of those crazy things where you're like, how do you even keep this all straight? And at some point, I know I'm going to go into a timeline of like a family history chart because otherwise it's so hard to keep these all straight. There's just so many Smiths. So today we are talking about John Smith, the son of Hyrum Smith, who succeeded his uncle as presiding patriarch at the age of 22. And he was in that office for years. And at this point, when the article was written in 1901, he had still been serving since 1855. He was still coming up on 50 years in office of presiding patriarch. Like, that's so impressive to me. So, I unfortunately do not have any pictures of him when he was younger, which I think is really sad. Like, he only had pictures taken when he was already old and had a white beard. So I'm completely lacking in pictures of him as a younger person, which is ironic because we definitely have some of Joseph F. Smith, so you'd think they would have taken some, but they didn't. Anyways, I'm going to be honest, I don't know very much about his life. Now, assuming it was semi-similar to Joseph F. Smith's, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he probably did not go to school and had worked quite a long time in raising cattle as a young person. Past that, honestly, no clue. So, yeah, let's, I know more about his general family than I do about him himself. So I am interested to find out more about John Smith. I'm sure that he did some more exciting things than raise cattle. So let's take a look about John Smith. So John Smith, the presiding patriarch to the church, was the son of Hyrum and Jerusha Barton Smith. Yeah, his first wife, okay, who died, and then later on he married Mary Fielding, who was Joseph F. Smith's mother. Yeah? So, not to be confused, like, he was not he and Joseph F. were brothers, but they're half-brothers. They had different mothers. He was born in Kirtland, Geauga, now Lake County, Ohio, September 22nd, 1832. His mother died October 13th, 1837, at the age of 5. Yeah, when he was 5. He had 6 children, 2 sons and 4 daughters, and she died when the youngest was 8 days old. He probably died in childbirth related, yeah. His father was from home at the time of her death in Missouri. On the 24th of December, 1837, his father married Miss Mary Fielding. Is it just me, or was that super fast afterwards? Christmas Eve, 1837. Gosh, 2.5 months after his wife died. Holy cow, Hyrum, chill. Oh, wow. She bore him 2 children, a son and a daughter. Okay, so he had a total of 3 sons and 5 daughters. Yeah, 8 children. But yeah, I told him he didn't have very many sons. So John was probably one of the older sons, yeah? And then Joseph Fielding we know about. In the spring of 1838, John went with his father's family to Far West, Caldwell County, Missouri, where he shared with the rest of the saints in the persecutions there. In the months of October and November 1838, his father, with his Uncle Joseph and others, was taken by a ruthless mob, and after being abused in many ways, threatened with death, etc., was finally lodged in Liberty, Clay County Jail. During the winter, his father's family, in connection with many others, were driven out of the state. Although small, he suffered much from cold and hunger. Yeah, I'll bet he did. He was, 6 years old? The family landed at Quincy, Illinois, about the month of March, 1839, where they remained a short time. Brother Hyrum Smith came home from Liberty Jail on the 22nd of April, 1839. They subsequently went up the Mississippi River to a place then called Commerce, afterward the city of Nauvoo. They shortly after moved about 2 miles down the road, where they remained in comparative peace for a short season. On the 27th of June, 1844, his father and his uncle Joseph the prophet were martyred in Carthage jail by a bloodthirsty mob. Yeah, we know about that. He was 12. Yeah. In the month of February, 1847, John left his father's folks and started west with Heber C. Kimball's family. Really? He went off on his own? Gosh, he was 15. At the age of 15, he left his house? He left his home. Like he literally moved out on his own. Like, I'm sorry, this blows my mind. I had no idea. Because at that time, Joseph F. was, 8? And, wow, John, 15. And he just left. He's like, okay, I can take care of myself. Okay, if you think you can. At this time, he did not know where the people were going, but he supposed to California. This company crossed the Mississippi River on a ferry boat and encamped on Sugar Creek, about 10 miles out. After 2 or 3 days, boy-like, he got homesick and went back to see his folks. During his stay at home, which was only for a few days, the river froze over, and he crossed back on skates and joined the company. Now he's 15, jeez. Okay, during the journey, he had to drive loose stock, drive team, herd cattle and horses, and do any kind of work he could. Many times he was drenched in the rain. On one occasion, Brother Heber P. Kimball, okay, probably Heber C. Kimball's son, maybe, and himself were driven by the force of the storm, stock and all, for a mile or so, although they were on horseback. The company journeyed westward through Iowa, stopping many times by the way in consequence of storms and soft roads, or, to speak more correctly, no roads, but soft prairie. They finally landed on the hill where now stands Council Bluffs City, and crossed over the Missouri River at a point where, as near as he can remember, now stands Omaha, called at that time Sarpy's Trading Post, among the Potawatomi Indians. They went up about 6 miles to the Little Papillon, and remained a short time. That's interesting to have this random French word thrown in there. Okay. During his stay there, he became acquainted with Colonel Thomas L. Kane, who was taken very sick, and John was his nurse for 2 weeks. Really? Okay, Thomas L. Kane was quite well known. He never got baptized, I don't think, but he did everything in his power to help the saints, because he felt that they had been done an injustice. And he was quite upset on their behalf, but he didn't believe in their religion, but he was very much a helpful person, and so he's really quite well known in church history since he helped them so much, especially at this juncture where they came to Council Bluffs, which was then called Winter Quarters, and stayed for a while. But apparently when he was sick, John Smith nursed him back to health. Good for him. Oh, awesome. Okay, in or about the month of August, they moved into winter quarters on the river Missouri, where now stands the town of Florence. In the forepart of September, he learned that his father's family were on the road, and he went, in company with brother A.W. Babbitt, back about 150 miles and met them. They came to winter quarters, where they remained 2 winters. He went to work with hired help, built a log house for the winter, and during the summer of 1847 made a fence, tilled the soil, and took a man's place in the hay and harvest field, as he was the only male member of the family who was able to work. Yeah, well, that's because he's the oldest, right? He's the oldest boy, I'm pretty sure. That's what I said. Interesting. So he basically built a farm for them. That's interesting because they were about to leave it, but good for him. It sounds like a hard worker. In April 1848, the family started for Great Salt Lake City. It was a rather hard journey as they did not have teams enough. John remembers that he had to drive a team composed of wild steers, cows, and oxen, with 2 wagons tied together, and before they had traveled over 2 miles, a wagon tongue broke, and they had to camp for the night. On the way over the plains, he broke several yoke of the cows and steers to work. He had to take a man's place by standing guard at night, and in the daytime to be the boy who brought the wood and water, herded the cows, and assisted to double teams over bad places and up hills, etc. That doesn't surprise me even a little tiny bit. First of all, they straight didn't have enough people to do that. But second of all, was as the oldest son, he was kind of taking the place of the father who was dead. Yeah? So, what was he supposed to do? I feel like he took on a lot of responsibility as the oldest son, yeah? That was really impressive. As a young teenager, he was 15. On one occasion, a circumstance occurred which he feels he will never forget. At about sundown, when the party were encamped on the Platte River, it was reported that a woman was lost. Without ceremony, he took his coat on his arm and a piece of cornbread in his hand, and started out up the road, to follow the part of the company which had left at noon. He had not gone far when he came up with a dead carcass, which was covered with wolves, fighting and howling. He walked past as fast and quietly as possible. He traveled 6 miles before he came up with any wagons. During this distance he passed about 20 such frightful scenes, but he got through safe, and he thinks he was unnoticed by the wolves. He stopped for the balance of the night with an acquaintance, and at daybreak proceeded on his journey, and found the lost woman, a little after sunrise, safe with her mother 6 miles from where he had stayed for the night. I wonder why he went back for her. Were they really that concerned? Because it sounds like she was fine. On the 22nd of September, his 16th birthday, he drove 5 wagons down the big mountain east of Salt Lake City. It was dark long before he got into camp with the last wagon. On the way, one wheel of his wagon ran into a tree, which was about 15 inches through. He had to lie on his back and chop the tree down with a dull axe before he could go any further. Oh, because it was dark, so yeah, okay. Yeah, it kind of makes sense, especially if the track wasn't that clear. Yeah. So you had to lie on your back and chop the tree down underneath the wheel. I'll bet that was really awkward. I wonder how long that took. With a dull axe even? It wasn't even sharp. Gosh. At about 11 p.m. the next day, he arrived in the Great Salt Lake Valley. In the spring of 1850, John was enrolled in a company of horsemen called the Battalion of Life Guards, for the purpose of standing guard, or going out at a minute's warning to protect the settlements from the marauding Indians, who were very angry at the time. So it's a militia. Yeah, just say it's a militia. Yeah, I understand the needing to stand guard. 18 years old, yeah, so I think that makes sense, yes? For about 10 years he was compelled to keep on hand a saddle horse and everything necessary for that purpose. Many times he was called and got up in the night and started off at once, and at other times he had to leave in the heat of harvest, and then his wife was obliged to take his place in the field. They didn't mention that he got married, mention the wife. I hate it when they don't do that. This he had to do in connection with working in the canyon and attending to the farm to support the family. On the 21st of September, 1852, his stepmother died. That was Mary Fielding, yeah? leaving him to provide for a family of 8, 3 of them, 1 man and 2 women, being old people, the youngest over 63 years old, also 1 brother and 3 sisters younger than himself. He was at the time 20 years, less 1 day, old. On the 25th of December, 1853, he married Miss Helen Maria Fisher, who bore him 9 children, 5 sons and 4 daughters. I think that's interesting that he was so willing to take over his mother's responsibilities. He definitely was the oldest son. Like, there's no other way for me to interpret this, because, why else would it be his responsibility? I don't know if he had an older sister or not, but he definitely was the oldest son. I feel a little bad for him. I feel like he had way too much responsibility at a young age. I never really realized that Joseph F. Smith was raised by his brother. I always understood that he was old enough to kind of take care of himself, sort of, but that I knew that Brigham Young took a really close interest in him and in his upbringing. But they never mentioned that his brother took care of him as a small child, because he was the only son of Mary Fielding. So it must have been one of the children. He said 1 brother and 3 sisters. Like, what, they just gloss over the fact that brother was Joseph F. Smith. Yeah. Interesting. I had no idea that John Smith raised him. I mean, not fully, but like to a certain extent. Wow. Okay. I had no idea. Well, good for him. I mean, good job, John Smith. I'll give you a round of applause, you know. In the spring of 1856, he went on horseback to Salmon River with President Brigham Young's party, a distance of 480 miles, and returned, which occupied 6 weeks' time. Hang on a second. I'm a little confused when he said that he had to get up with the militia and leave his wife to work in the field. Yeah, but okay. I guess that's later. They're jumping around the timeline then. Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, let me go back and reread what I just read, because I didn't really take it in. In the spring of 1856, he went on horseback to Salmon River with President Brigham Young's party, a distance of 480 miles, and returned, which occupied 6 weeks' time. Okay, why did they mention that? Sure. On February 18th, 1855... Oh, now we're going back in time. That's great. I hate that. I'm sorry. It annoys me, because why can't you just tell a story chronologically, you know? Brother Smith was ordained to the office of Patriarch under the hands of President Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and J. M. Grant. That's Jedediah M. Grant. That's J. Grant's father. And Apostles Orson Hyde, Orson Pratt, Wilford Woodruff, George A. Smith, and Lorenzo Snow. President Brigham Young being mouth. It may be well here to state that this is the only office in the church which is handed down from father to son by right of lineage. His grandfather, Joseph Smith Sr., was the first patriarch to the church. He was ordained by his son, the prophet Joseph Smith. John's father, Hyrum Smith, was ordained to this office by his father, and John would doubtless have been ordained by his father if he had lived until John had arrived at a proper age. Yeah, probably. On September 16, 1859, John started for Florence with a 4-mule team to bring his sister and her husband and family to Utah. His sister. So, another one of Hyrum Smith's kid, I guess. Interesting. So she must have been older and already left the family and decided to stay behind. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it sounds like. I could be wrong, I could be misinterpreting this, but 1859, most of the immigrants had already come. Yeah, from the original, Nauvoo group. It's surprising to me that she stayed so long. He traveled in company with Elder John Y. Green across the plains and made the trip from Salt Lake City to Florence in 32 days. Wow, that's impressive. Laying over on the road 2 days at the time, distance 1,011 miles. Laying over on the road, so he only rested 2 days. Yeah, okay, that's what I understand from that. During his stay in the East, he took his sister and her 2 youngest children and traveled across Iowa to Montrose, a distance of 350 miles in 8 days, with a pair of mules and a light wagon, and visited Nauvoo and different places in Illinois, reviewed many places of his boyhood, and found quite a number of his connections. I'll bet he did. He returned to Florence in February 1860, where he spent considerable time in assisting to put wagons and handcarts together. and in doing all, he could expedite the starting of the European immigrants on the plains. That's cool. Good for him. In the month of June, he was appointed by George Buchanan, who had charge of the immigrants that season, to organize a company and take charge of it across the plains. He went to work at once, got a company of more than 40 wagons in readiness, loaded his sister and family, and started out. The trip was made in 70 days. Well, good for him. I say, that's quite impressive. At the General Conference, April 1862, he was called to take a mission to Scandinavia. On the 17th of May following, he started out on horseback, without purse or scrip, to cross the plains and the ocean. He was invited by Elder John R. Murdoch to go with him to the Missouri River, as he had charge of a company of wagons and teams to bring out immigrants. Brother Smith accepted the invitation, and Brother Murdoch assisted him with provisions. All went well until about noon one day as the company left the Sweetwater River, when Brother Smith was taken down with mountain fever. Oh, that sucks. Now, if you're not familiar with mountain fever, I did look it up at one point. It's also called Rocky Mountain Fever. It is a virus that really only goes around in that area. Is it a virus or is it bacteria? No, I'm not sure. But either way, it's not fun. Yeah, it was at any point very endemic to one specific region of the world, which was, the Rocky Mountains. So it was not uncommon for people to get sick during that time. Yeah, that doesn't sound fun. During the night, the fever was very severe, and the pain throughout every joint was excruciating. Toward the latter part of the night, he was administered to by some of the elders, and in the morning was able to pursue his journey on horseback. Wow, good for him. He was very weak and had to get down often from his horse to rest. Don't push yourself so hard, At Fort Laramie, he sold his horse, which was worth $90, for $40, and at Florence, his saddle, which was worth $20, for $10. He met friends who gave him money to assist him on his journey. His fare from Florence to Liverpool was about $100. When he arrived at Liverpool, he had 21 shillings in his pocket. Oh, gosh. He paid for his fare to London, where he had to get a passport from the American minister before he could cross the continent of Europe. That's so funny that back then you could go all the way to England without a passport, but when you were there, you had to get one in order to keep going. That's really funny to me. Today you have to have a passport before you leave. There he borrowed money to take him through, which he afterwards paid, from Hull, England, to Hamburg, Germany. The boat met headwinds and a rough sea, and all on board were sick. Even the captain had to get on deck for air. Oh, gosh. At Hamburg, he met his cousin, Elder Jesse N. Smith, who had preceded him about 18 months. Brother Jesse had with him an interpreter, and all went well. They reached the island of Zeeland, Denmark, on the 12th of September, 1862. Okay. Brother Smith remained on this mission until April 13th, 1864, when he started for home, sailing by way of Kattegat. The captain ran into the Bay of Elsinore and lay over about 7 hours in consequence of a heavy gale of headwind. Many passengers were sick. Oh. I feel like they're talking a lot about the ships and how sick they were, and they didn't tell a single mission story. I find that a little strange, but maybe he didn't write them down. While on this mission, he studied hard and obtained a good understanding of the Scandinavian languages, Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish. Huh. If learning 3 languages at once and he was only there 2 years, I'm guessing he didn't speak that fluently. I don't know, though. Some people are really good at languages, so it's hard to say. On arriving at Grimsby, they found some emigrants for Zion awaiting them, who had traveled by way of Lubeck, and they all, about 300 in number, continued their journey by rail to Liverpool. There he was appointed president of the ship's company. He embarked on a large sailing ship, Monarch of the Sea, bound for New York, having on board 973 souls of the saints, Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, Germans, Scotch, Welsh, Irish, English, and Americans, the largest company of Latter-day Saints which, up to that time, had left the shores of Europe. Wow! They were over 40 days out to sea, with headwinds and a good deal of the time. On the banks of Newfoundland, they saw a number of very large icebergs. Well, we know how dangerous that is. Ask the Titanic how dangerous that is. On their arrival at Castle Gardens, New York, they went immediately on board the steamboat St. John's and sailed up the Hudson River to Albany. and from there they traveled by rail to St. Joseph, Missouri, and thence by steamboat up the Missouri River to Wyoming, Nebraska. There's a city called Wyoming, Nebraska. Of course there is. Okay. On Brother Smith's arrival at Wyoming, he was so weird. He was appointed to take charge on the plains of a Scandinavian company of 30 wagons. He was there joined by more wagons in charge of Captain Patterson, making in all over 60, for safety against the Indians, as the latter were very hostile in that season, many people having been killed, and horses, mules, and cattle stolen and wagons burned. Well, that sucks. Many times on the journey, ranchers, traders, and also officers at government posts would use every argument possible to induce them to stop for safety. Yeah, I can understand that. It's too dangerous right now, don't do it, yeah. The answer Brother Smith would give them was, "We are used to Indian warfare, and we have only provisions enough to take us home, even if we keep moving, and we would rather run our risk of fighting Indians than starve on the plains." Well, he's not wrong. Yeah, okay. The company reached home safe on the 25th of September, 1864. After a few days, the immigrants were distributed among their respective friends in the various settlements, but for several years Brother Smith was kept busy as an interpreter for the Scandinavians, so I guess his language must have been pretty decent. Good for him. Since that time, he has been engaged in the duties of his calling as a patriarch, traveling throughout the settlements of the saints and attending to other business and on the farm. Up to date, he has given to the saints 15,660 patriarchal blessings. That is so impressive. Wow. Oh, that's the end of the article. Okay. I was expecting it to be like signed by somebody or like, to make it clear that that was the end. Sorry. I didn't catch that right away. 15,660. Well, the thing is, I also feel like they left out a lot. Because they talked about his life up to 1864, and then they're like, and since then he's been doing, patriarch stuff. Okay. I'm fairly certain that he had stories to tell from that time. So that's a bit annoying. So I'm going to fact check this just a touch. It sounds fairly believable. I mean, I don't think that there's not too much that sounds terribly like it couldn't happen. It's not terribly unbelievable, but it just, that just seems like a good thing to do. Okay, so let's read a little bit from the Wikipedia article. So John Smith was born 22nd September 1832, which was in line with what they said, and died November 6, 1911. Was the fifth presiding patriarch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church. His father was Hyrum Smith, the older brother of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yeah. Having served for 56 years, he was the longest-serving presiding patriarch in the history of the LDS Church. And he will remain so because it's not a calling anymore. Smith traveled west to winter quarters and then Salt Lake City with the Mormon pioneers. He traveled with Heber C. Kimball's party and his stepmother, Mary Fielding Smith. Yeah, so I can see why they say that, because he started out in Heber C. Kimball's party, and then he broke off when they got to winter quarters and stayed with his stepmother's family, Mary Fielding Smith. Smith joined the battalion of lifeguards to protect the Latter-day Saints from Native Americans. That also aligns, the militia. During his life, Smith maintained strong relationships with his family members in the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our LDS Church, particularly his cousin, Joseph Smith III, who was the oldest son, I believe, of Joseph and Emma. Though John Smith was never released as presiding patriarch, some general authorities were outspoken in their disapproval of Smith's unwillingness to marry more than one plural wife. Holy cow, really? And his habit of tobacco use. Well, I don't blame him for that, because a lot of people used tobacco back then. In fact, Brigham Young even admitted that in a talk in, I believe, the 1860s, that he hadn't completely given it up yet. So I'm not that surprised about that. He was a tobacco chewer. Yeah, I don't know if he was a chewer or a smoker, but either way. Smith was married to Helen Maria Fisher, with whom he had 9 children. Smith married Nancy Melissa Lemon as his plural wife. After the encouragement of Brigham Young, Smith had 1 child with Lemon. Interesting. That is... He was criticized for that? He just sounds monogamous to me. It didn't sound like he was really that excited about marrying the second woman. Oh, the poor guy. I feel like he was really, coerced into that. Interesting. They didn't mention that in this article. considering he had children with her, I'm assuming that they got married before this, and especially since he was encouraged by Brigham Young, who died in 1877. So, like this was long before this article was written, you know? I don't know, that seems weird. Alright, I'm going to skip some of it because I feel like a lot of it is pretty clear. And also there's no reason to doubt a lot of what they were saying. Okay, so far it just lines up with what we've already read, so let's skip down a little bit. On February 18th, 1855, at 22 years old, the younger John Smith succeeded his great-uncle, Uncle John Smith, as fifth presiding patriarch of the LDS Church following the latter's death. In this capacity, Smith acted as a voice in the setting apart of his younger half-brother Joseph F. Smith as president of the church. Wow! Although Smith was glossophobic and refused nearly every public speaking assignment that Brigham Young gave him, his patriarchal blessings were eloquent. Glossophobic, or speech anxiety, is the fear of public speaking. I did not know that! Holy cow, I'm learning all sorts of fun stuff. That explains it, because I think that he almost never spoke in conference, which was unusual because a lot of other people did. And remember, he served for 56 years. He spoke a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. Total. So, in 56 years of being presiding patriarch. So, yeah. That makes sense to me. I'll bet his talks were short. Whenever he had to do them. Okay, in 1862, Smith was asked to postpone his duties as patriarch to serve a mission in Denmark in order to gain experience. However, according to scholar Irene M. Bates, in reality he may have been sent on a mission because of concerns that the general authorities of the LDS Church had with Smith staying in close contact with his cousin Joseph Smith III and other relatives who participated in the RLDS Church. Smith was at one time called a Josephite for maintaining close relationships with his family in the LDS Church. That's ridiculous. Okay, it has nothing to do with his religion. They're his cousins. Why would he not want to have contact with them? I'm surprised by that. The general authorities of the LDS Church frequently disapproved of Smith's actions, such as refusing to live with his plural wife, Melissa, or refusing to marry another woman. And additionally, he was publicly rebuked at the pulpit twice in the 1894 General Conference because of his tobacco usage. Gosh. Oh, geez. Like, you can either release him or just get over it, you know? Like, gosh. Although it was intended that the oldest son of the presiding patriarch to succeed his father, Hyrum Fisher Smith, did not succeed his father. Smith was succeeded by his grandson, and Hyrum Fisher Smith's son, Hyrum G. Smith. This slight to Hyrum Fisher Smith caused some distress in the family. Interesting. Although there is no official reason for this. According to Bates, it was likely because Hyrum F. Smith was separated from his wife when his father died, had a difficulty following the word of wisdom, and had recently had a difficult time keeping a steady job and supporting his family. Yeah, okay, he's a little bit of a screw-up, yeah? John Smith was buried in Salt Lake City. He became the longest-serving presiding patriarch in LDS Church history, remaining in that position for 56 years until his death from pneumonia on November 6, 1911, in Salt Lake City. During his time as patriarch, Smith gave over 20,000 blessings, willing to travel hundreds of miles on horseback in any weather condition to give blessings. Good for him. That's really impressive. Personal life. Smith was involved in plural marriage and had 2 wives. Smith's first wife, Helen Maria Fisher. She was born on September 20th, 1835. They almost had the same birthday. It's cool. In Pennsylvania. Smith and Fisher married on December 25th, Christmas, 1853. She died on September 3rd, 1907. Helen was outspoken about her lack of enthusiasm for plural marriage, which was a highly encouraged practice by the LDS Church at the time. Brigham Young encouraged Smith to marry another woman, which Smith obeyed 5 months later. Smith married 23-year-old Nancy Melissa Lemon on February 18, 1857. Lemon was born in Illinois on September 6, 1833, and died on March 29, 1915. Okay. After the death of Helen, Joseph Smith III wrote to Smith stating that he was not surprised that Smith had not remarried, because he and Helen had been married for a long time. Smith responded admitting that he had been lonely since the death of Helen, but that it would be difficult to find a substitute for Helen since they had been married for nearly 54 years. In his letter to his cousin, Smith made no mention of Melissa, to whom he was still married. Smith had 9 children with Helen Fisher. Smith had 1 child with Melissa Lemon. That is really interesting. Yeah, he didn't seem terribly excited about his second wife. Oh, I feel like he was basically coerced into it, and I feel bad for him. Like, he didn't want to marry her. I'm sorry. Well, that sucks. Like, I feel like this is the reason why divorce exists, you know? You should never feel like you have to do something. You're obliged to do something. You need to stay somewhere. That's interesting. Gosh. Like, that's a lot more of the controversy, of course. You know, the article from the church would probably not have any controversy if they wanted to talk about someone. But, like, he didn't seem particularly like a controversial person. It sounds like the worst things that he did was not want to get married to a second wife, which makes sense to me since his wife was so opposed to it, you know, his first wife. Also, it didn't sound like he wanted to anyway. And that he used tobacco. Like, those are the worst things he's done. And he kept in contact with his cousin, Joseph Smith III. Like, geez. I know you don't want him to, you know, defect, so to speak. You don't want him to apostatize and go to join the other church. But at the same time, that's his first cousin. He probably knew him when he was younger, and they probably played together and stuff while Joseph Smith was still alive. I don't see that it at all surprising that he wanted to keep in contact with his cousin. I don't know, it seems weird to me that people are like, no, you can't talk to him. Dude, why not? Like, that's weird. And that annoys me, that was encouraged at the time. But yes, it is very confusing that he has the same actual exact name as his uncle who preceded him in the same calling. So, yeah, not to be confused with his Uncle John. He sounded like a really good person, though. I feel like I would have been friends with him. You know? He sounds like a really nice person and really responsible, like very responsible person. I also am a little sad that the Wikipedia article didn't mention him taking care of his younger siblings. They don't mention it. I'm a little surprised. Oh no, it does say that. After the death of Mary Fielding in 1852, Smith was required to support the family of 8. There you go. That's crazy to me. Wow. So my hat's off to him. Amazing person. So very admirable. And I am a little bit annoyed on his behalf for how he was criticized. Because there's nothing wrong with being monogamous, first of all. Second of all, there are worse things than being a tobacco chewer. You know? Like, dude, if you were really that worried about his behavior, then you should point out something that's worse, you know? Like, is he somebody who flirts constantly? Is he cheating on his wife? Is he somebody who yells at people for no reason? Is he someone who, you know, gets in fights? No? None of those? Then what's your problem? You know? Let the man chew his tobacco in peace. Plus, he lived a long life. It's not like it shortened his life. I mean, of course, that is, you know, a matter of luck as well, but you know, like I said, Brigham Young used tobacco as well, and he even admitted it over the pulpit several times. He's like, yeah, I'm really struggling with it. And I'm like, yeah. And the fact that he did finally quit in the 1860s sometime, I can't remember exactly, but like that's late in life. He died in 1877, you know, whereas John Smith seems to have always used it. Like, it didn't sound like he ever quit. But like I said, you get old, you get set in your ways, and there's also an addictive aspect to tobacco, you know? Like, dude, cut the guy some slack. Anyways, that is really interesting. I learned so much, and I found that absolutely fascinating. I hope you did too, because that was super fun for me. I love reading about really cool people and just, you know, looking at their lives from our perspective today is so fascinating to me. This is why I make these. So thank you for joining me today. If you liked that as much as I did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.